Ladies and gentlemen, there's a certain kind of silence you only hear right before betrayal. It's not loud, it's not violent, it's a gentle whisper that crawls across your skin warning you that someone you once loved has started celebrating your downfall before it even happens. I lived through that silence. I stood in front of a man who took my hand, smiled at me tenderly and said, "Only 3 days, finally everything's mine." That was the moment I realized I wasn't standing next to a partner. I was standing next to a countdown clock. And after that smile, I made a decision that changed everything. I remember the moment with a clarity that still shakes something deep inside me, because it was not just a simple smile and it was not just a simple touch of the hand. It was a performance, a curtain rising, a scene unfolding in slow motion, as if the universe wanted me to see every detail, every shift, every shadow that passed across his face. He reached for my hand with a gentleness that felt rehearsed, as if he had practiced it in a mirror somewhere when I was not around. His fingers slid over mine slowly, almost lovingly, and for a heartbeat I almost believed it was affection. I almost believed it was care and warmth and the familiar tenderness I once trusted without hesitation. But then that smile came, the one that curled at the edge of his mouth like a man who had just been handed a trophy he never earned. It was not a smile meant for me. It was not a smile of gratitude or devotion or genuine connection. It was the smile of someone who believed he was standing on the edge of triumph and that I had no idea what was coming. He leaned closer and his voice softened, as if he was sharing a secret meant only for me. "Only 3 days. Finally everything is mine." That is what he whispered. A sentence that sounded harmless, almost sweet if you stripped it of its meaning. But the way he said it held a weight that pressed against my chest so hard I thought my heart would crack. It was a whisper drenched in victory, drenched in entitlement, drenched in a kind of arrogance that could only come from a person who believed they had already won. I felt the temperature in the room shift even though nothing moved. It was like someone had pulled a plug from the world and all the warmth that used to exist between us drained out, leaving cold, heavy air behind. I felt it in my hands, in my bones, in the center of my stomach. A whisper that carved a truth into me. A truth I had not seen before but now could not unsee. He looked at me with this strange mix of pity and triumph, like he thought I was too soft to react, too naive to understand, too blind to notice the dagger behind his smile. He squeezed my hand lightly, like he was comforting me, as if I was the one who needed reassurance, as if 3 days from now something wonderful would happen for us both. But I saw something else in his eyes. I saw calculation. I saw greed. I saw a man who believed he was about to step into a life he had built on the bones of my trust. A man who believed that in just 3 days I would be left standing in the ruins while he rose from them like some kind of twisted version of a champion. And in that moment something inside me split cleanly down the middle. One part of me felt shock, disbelief, hurt. But the other part of me woke up with a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade pressed against my pulse. He kept talking softly, though I barely heard the words because my mind had already begun stitching together pieces of things I had ignored, things I had brushed aside thinking they were insignificant. The late nights, the whispered phone calls he took outside, the papers he guarded, the sudden secretive behavior, the questions he dodged, the moments he pushed me away, the strange mood swings, the way he watched me when he thought I was not aware. All of it began to click into place like someone had just turned on a light in a room I thought was empty. The smile he wore now was the final puzzle piece. It was the confession he never intended to give and the revelation he thought would never be discovered. I felt my hand growing cold inside his, not because of the temperature but because my body had shifted into a state I had never known before. I was not panicked. I was not afraid. I was not shaking or crying or pleading for answers. I was still in a way that surprised even me. Still in a way that felt powerful, like the quiet before a storm learns its own strength. And he looked at me expecting confusion or concern or maybe even a hopeful kind of ignorance. He expected the woman he thought I was. The one who trusted him too easily. The one who believed him too quickly. The one who would have smiled back and asked what he meant and allowed herself to be blindsided 3 days later. But I did not ask him anything. I looked directly at him and I saw through him. He must have misread my silence because he smiled wider and fuller now. A smile that stretched almost to pride. It carried a kind of satisfaction so deep it made my skin crawl. He thought I was clueless. He thought he had fooled me entirely. He thought he was standing there holding the hand of a woman who would continue walking right into the trap he had built without ever looking down. He thought he had already won. That smile revealed everything. It revealed his greed. It revealed his betrayal. It revealed the truth he never intended me to discover. It revealed the monster hiding under the mask he had worn for so long that even he might have forgotten it was there. I remember thinking how strange it was that a single moment could change everything. That a single smile could unravel years of trust. That a single sentence could rewrite the entire history of a relationship. I remember wondering how long he had waited to say those words out loud. How long he had counted the days until he believed he would have everything. How long he had seen me not as a partner or a companion but as an obstacle standing between him and the life he thought he deserved. And as these thoughts rushed through me, I realized how easily he had underestimated me. How easily he assumed I would break at the first sign of betrayal. How easily he assumed I would stay silent and powerless. How easily he assumed I would never fight back. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, searching perhaps for the reaction he expected. But I offered him nothing. No anger, no tears, no confusion, just stillness, quiet, awareness. And that silence did something to him. I saw it flicker across his expression. A small hesitation, a small uncertainty, a small moment where he wondered if I understood something he had not meant to reveal. But he brushed it away quickly because men like him never believe their victims can see through them. Their arrogance is their comfort. Their downfall, their blindfold. He squeezed my hand again and told me not to worry. Those words slid across my skin like ice because he was not hiding anything anymore. He believed he was too close to victory to care. Only 3 days. Finally everything is mine. He repeated it like a man savoring dessert. Like someone reliving a dream he had waited so long to taste. And while he relished the future he imagined, I stood there realizing that I had been handed the truth at the perfect moment. Not too late. Not too early. Exactly when I needed it. Exactly when the knowledge would be powerful enough not to break me but to transform me. As he walked away humming softly as if life could not possibly be kinder to him, I looked down at my hand, the same hand he had held so confidently moments before, and I felt an awakening rising in me, a strength I did not know I possessed, a fire that had been waiting quietly for a spark. That smile had been his celebration, but for me it became my turning point, my ignition, my beginning. And even though he believed the countdown was his triumph, he had no idea that the moment he whispered those words he had already lost something far greater than anything he thought he would gain. He had lost the illusion that I was blind. He had lost the advantage. He had lost the woman he thought he could control. And all because of one smile that exposed everything. Silence has a strange way of wrapping itself around you when the truth finally steps out of the shadows. It is not a loud silence. It is not the dramatic kind that fills movies. It is softer, colder, heavier. It presses against your chest like a weighted blanket you never asked for, and it settles in your ears until every small sound in the room feels amplified. That was the silence I felt after he whispered those words. Only 3 days. Finally everything is mine. The world did not explode. No alarms went off. No thunder struck the sky. Instead the air grew still as if the universe wanted me to hear nothing but my own awakening. It was the kind of silence that tells you something important, something painful, something you should have noticed earlier but did not. I did not ask him what he meant. My tongue stayed glued to the roof of my mouth as if even my voice wanted to remain hidden for a moment. Instead I watched him. I watched the way he carried himself after he spoke. His shoulders were lighter, his steps smoother. There was a bounce in his walk, a rhythm that suggested victory long before any battle had actually taken place. He moved like a man who believed he had already secured his future. Like someone who thought the world had opened its doors wide and invited him to take anything he wanted. It was almost poetic in the most painful way, because the more he celebrated, the more the silence around me screamed the truth I had ignored for far too long. I followed him with my eyes as he paced around the room humming a small tune to himself. A tune I had never heard him hum before. Maybe he had been saving it for this moment. Maybe he thought this tune sounded like triumph. He walked to the window and looked out at the world with the smug contentment of someone who believed he was about to rise above everyone. He stood there with his hands behind his back as if he were some victorious ruler surveying a kingdom he assumed would soon belong to him. I watched him breathe in the moment like it was the sweetest scent he had ever experienced. And the silence between us grew thicker, heavier, louder in its own haunting way. He did not look back at me right away. He savored the moment too deeply. He believed he had pulled everything off with such elegance that there was nothing left for him to fear. He thought he had hidden his betrayal so flawlessly that he could finally stop pretending. He thought he had already won. And in that silence I realized something profound. People do not betray you out of desperation. They betray you out of confidence. Out of the belief that they can get away with it. Out of the certainty that you will never see through them. He had grown comfortable in the shadows he had created. Comfortable enough to speak openly to my face about the countdown he believed would end in my destruction. When he finally turned around, his expression had softened, but not in a way that belonged to love or understanding. It was softened by arrogance. The kind of arrogance that grows quietly over time until it becomes a living, breathing creature feeding off pride. He looked at me with the eyes of someone who believed I was completely blind. Someone who thought the silence surrounding me meant ignorance. Someone who assumed I was not thinking at all. But I was thinking. Oh, I was thinking more clearly than I had thought in years. Because silence does not mean confusion. Silence is the first breath of strategy. In that stillness I replayed every recent moment of our life together. Every lingering glance that felt off. Every late night he brushed me aside. Every unexplained errand. Every document he had refused to let me see. Every conversation he changed abruptly. Every shift in his tone. Every cold morning where he woke up distant. Every night he rolled away from me pretending he was tired while something else clearly kept him awake. The silence assembled these moments into a puzzle, and for the first time the pieces fit. The silence was not empty. It was full of revelation. He moved around the room in slow, confident steps as if he were savoring the anticipation. He even adjusted his shirt in the mirror and smiled at his reflection. A small, satisfied grin that made my skin tighten. I watched the way he lifted his chin slightly as if he were practicing for the life he believed was coming. The life he thought he would live without me. A life he had built on lies and deception and the belief that I would never wake up. The silence captured every detail. Every breath. Every flicker in his eyes. Every shift in his shoulders. Every whisper of confidence that floated off him. I stood still. I said nothing. My stillness was the one thing he did not understand. Stillness to him meant weakness. Stillness meant acceptance. Stillness meant defeat. But in that moment stillness meant power. It meant watching. It meant absorbing. It meant allowing the truth to unfold in front of me without interrupting it. It meant letting him reveal who he truly was. The silence made him bold. It made him careless. It made him reveal more than he ever intended to show. He believed he was safe because I had not reacted. He believed he was invisible because I had not confronted him. He believed he was untouchable because I had not spoken. Silence became his mirror and he could not see that it was reflecting his downfall, not his victory. He walked closer to me again, and this time he touched my shoulder gently like he was comforting me for something I did not know was coming. He thought he was being kind. He thought he was maintaining the illusion of a caring partner. He thought he was keeping me calm so I would not question anything before the final day arrived. He did not realize that his gentle touch now felt different. Not loving. Not warm. It felt calculated, rehearsed, intentional. His fingers rested lightly on my shoulder as he told me to trust him. The silence around us pulsed with a dark kind of irony. I nodded slightly, but not because I agreed. I nodded because silence sometimes speaks louder than any words. He smiled again, and his smile stretched even wider this time. A smile that confirmed everything the silence had been trying to tell me. He believed I was still asleep. He believed I would stay silent out of innocence. But my silence was transforming into understanding. And understanding is the first step toward power. As he walked past me again humming that same triumphant tune, I listened closely. Every note held arrogance. Every note held greed. Every note held the confidence of a man who thought he had outsmarted everyone, including me. The silence around me swallowed that tune until it sounded dull and hollow. He did not know that the silence was sharpening me. The silence was teaching me. The silence was giving me space to think without him noticing. I watched him sink into the couch as he scrolled through his phone with a smug smirk. He laughed softly at something he read, something I never saw, and the sound pierced through the air like a blade. It startled me not because it was loud but because it was careless, so deeply and painfully careless. A man on the verge of cruel victory laughs like that. A man who thinks the world has finally bent to his will laughs like that. A man who does not fear consequences laughs like that. And the silence recorded every second. I turned away from him slowly and let my eyes drift toward the window. The world outside was calm, almost peaceful. A few people walking, dogs, cars moving down the street, leaves shaking softly in the wind. Everything looked so normal, so unaware that my life had shifted entirely after one whisper and one smile. The silence pressed against me again, but this time it did not feel heavy. It felt clarifying, like someone had wiped a foggy mirror clean and my reflection was finally visible again. He continued moving through the room in his quiet celebration. He stretched. He whistled. He checked his watch. He rehearsed his future in the air around him. And all the while he never once wondered why I was silent. He never questioned why I was so calm. He never doubted his own victory. He never imagined that maybe the silence he was so comfortable with was the very thing turning against him. He believed he had 3 days of safety. But what he did not know was that silence is not the absence of thought. Silence is preparation. Silence is strength. Silence is the moment a woman sees everything clearly for the first time. And once she sees the truth, she never goes back to being the person she was before. That silence did not protect him. It prepared me. Preparation begins quietly. It never announces itself. It does not burst into the room demanding attention. It slips in through the cracks of awareness, slowly, carefully, intentionally. That is how it started for me. Not with panic. Not with fear. Not with the wild rush of betrayal crashing through my veins. It started with a steady breath. A steady thought. A steady understanding that if he had spent months or years preparing my downfall, then I needed to prepare my rise with twice the precision and 10 times the clarity. I did not move right away. I let the silence settle for a while because I knew that sometimes the most powerful decisions come from the calmest moments. And when the quiet had finally molded itself into focus, I began. I did not confront him. That was the first choice I made. Confrontation gives power to the guilty. It alerts them. It warns them. It gives them time to rebuild their walls and hide their tracks. He expected me to scream or crumble or question him. He expected explosive emotion because that is what people like him rely on. Emotional reactions blind the betrayed. They cloud judgment. They make people impulsive. But I chose stillness. I chose to let him believe he had successfully broken me into silence. I chose to let him celebrate a victory he did not yet earn. That illusion gave me room to prepare. I went back into the memory of every moment we had shared recently, searching for details I had dismissed. Details he had hoped I would never revisit. Preparation is not always about gathering new information. Sometimes it is about re-examining the things you already know with a sharper mind. I remember the night he rushed into the room flustered with a stack of papers he hid under a book, claiming they were work files. I remember the sudden interest he developed in checking the mail before I could reach the door. I remembered how he locked his phone more frequently and turned the screen away from me when messages popped up. I remembered the whispered calls outside at strange hours. I remembered the hesitation in his voice when I once asked about our savings. All these fragments came together like pieces of a larger plan he thought I would never solve. Then I began pulling threads. Not physically, not loudly, quietly, strategically. I checked every document that belonged to me. Every account, every record, every paper that had my name written anywhere near his. I studied signatures, dates, numbers, patterns. It did not take long before I found the first crack. A minor detail he overlooked. The kind of mistake made only by someone who has grown too confident in their deception. And the moment I saw it, a shift occurred inside me. A new version of myself awakened. A version that understood the value of strategy. A version capable of outthinking someone who believed I was incapable of anything. He continued living his double life, completely unaware that I was unfolding his secrets one by one. He moved through the house with the same arrogant lightness, the same triumph in his steps, the same belief that he was untouchable. He hummed. He planned. He congratulated himself in private. all while I gathered the truth piece by piece, weaving it together with the steady patience of someone who had been pushed too far to remain blind. Preparation changed the way I moved around him. I became more observant. I paid attention to the slightest shifts in his tone, to every gesture, to every careless slip of the tongue. People who believe they are winning speak too freely. They reveal too much. His arrogance was a fountain of information pouring out every day. And all I had to do was listen. Every word he muttered under his breath, every sigh, every smirk, every secretive phone call became part of the strategy forming in my mind. I began keeping my emotions locked tightly inside. Even when I uncovered something painful. Even when I read something that nearly cracked the calm I fought so hard to maintain. I held it together because I knew that emotional reactions would only give him more power. Instead, I wrote everything down in private. Every observation, every document, every clue. Words became tools. Information became armor. Knowing the truth no longer hurt. It empowered. As I matched each discovery with the patterns he had created, I started to understand the full scope of what he planned to do. He was not trying to escape quietly. He was trying to take everything. Every asset. Every right. Every step of stability I had built. He wanted the victory, not the separation. He wanted the prize, not the freedom. That realization turned my preparation into something deeper. It was no longer just about protecting myself. It was about reclaiming the power he thought he had stolen. Every night he thought I slept peacefully beside him, but I was wide awake building my plan in the dark. I would stare at the ceiling, forming the order in which I needed to act. I would practice the lines I would later speak. I would imagine every possible move he might make so I could be 10 steps ahead. Preparation became the quiet fire burning inside me. It fueled me, strengthened me, fortified me. I visited places he did not know about. I spoke to people he never imagined I would reach. People who had answers. People who had authority. People who could help me unravel the deceit he thought was perfectly woven. And I did it all behind a calm smile, behind a gentle tone, behind a mask that mirrored the one he had worn for so long. The difference was mine was built for justice, not betrayal. He remained unaware. That was his weakness. A man who thinks he has outsmarted the world never looks behind him. Never questions silence. Never wonders if the quiet might be plotting his downfall. He did not realize that my stillness was not a sign of surrender. It was a sign of preparation. Preparation that sharpened me into someone he no longer recognized. By the time the third day approached, I had all the proof I needed. All the evidence, all the clarity, all the quiet strength a betrayed woman could carry. And he still walked around the house smiling like he had already claimed his reward. He had no idea that while he prepared for my collapse, I had prepared for his unmasking. Preparation gave me power he never expected. Preparation gave me control he never imagined. Preparation turned the countdown he created into a clock that would ultimately strike against him. Because when a woman prepares, she does not prepare to break. She prepares to rise. The morning of the third day arrived with a strange kind of stillness that felt almost unreal, as if the universe knew what was coming before either of us spoke a single word. I woke up before him and lay there quietly staring at the soft light stretching across the ceiling, feeling something powerful, something steady, something fierce growing inside me. It was not fear. It was not doubt. It was the certainty that the moment had finally come. The moment where the silence I had carried so carefully would turn into action. The moment where every piece I had gathered, every detail I had collected, every truth he thought I would never uncover would shift the ground beneath his feet. I turned my head and looked at him sleeping so peacefully beside me, unaware that the world he built on lies was about to collapse. His breathing was soft and calm. His face relaxed. There was no trace of guilt hidden in his expression because he did not feel any. His confidence had numbed him completely. He believed victory was already in his hands. He believed he had caged my fate. He believed my silence was the silence of defeat. I watched him for a long moment, not because I felt sentiment and not because I felt anger, but because I knew that in a few hours he would wake up into a reality he never planned for. I got out of bed slowly, quietly, intentionally. My feet touched the floor gently, as if they were stepping into a new life instead of the one he thought I was stuck in. I moved to the bathroom, closed the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. What I saw was not the same woman who stood frozen when he whispered those words 3 days ago. This reflection was sharper, stronger, clearer. My eyes carried a fire he had never seen. My posture was steady. My breath was firm. Preparation had molded me into someone new, someone he would never be able to manipulate again. I took a deep breath and felt a strange calmness settle over me. A calmness born from knowing that the truth was on my side and that his lies were about to unravel in front of him like a rope snapping under pressure. When I stepped out of the bathroom, he was still asleep, and for a brief moment I let myself observe a scene that had once looked like comfort and familiarity but now felt like a stage where he had acted for far too long. The bed we shared, the life we shared, the dreams we once planned, all of it had turned into props in a story he was trying to rewrite without me. I walked to the kitchen and began preparing the coffee the same way he liked it, which felt ironic but purposeful. There was power in calm routine. There was power in allowing the morning to appear ordinary. People who think they have control are most easily caught in the moments where they least expect disruption. By the time he woke up and walked into the kitchen rubbing his eyes and stretching lazily, I was already seated at the table. He smiled at me, the same proud, victorious smile he had worn since the day he whispered the countdown. Only 3 days. Finally everything is mine. He poured himself a cup of coffee and hummed softly under his breath as if he were celebrating something only he understood. He sat across from me and began talking about nothing important. Weather, traffic, work, a meaningless stream of casual conversation that hid the storm of betrayal underneath. He believed the day would unfold according to his plan. He believed he would walk into the future with everything. He believed this morning was the calm before his triumph, not the calm before his exposure. As he spoke, I studied him carefully. Every gesture, every tone, every smug detail on his face. He glanced at his watch 3 or 4 times, trying to hide the excitement building inside him. There was a sparkle in his eyes every time he thought about the hours ahead. He could already taste the victory. He leaned back in his chair with confidence radiating off him like heat. He had no idea what I knew. No idea what I had prepared. No idea that the woman sitting across from him was about to turn the entire story upside down. He reached for my hand again, just like he had that first day. His fingers wrapped around mine in a way that once felt intimate but now felt staged, manufactured, deliberate. He squeezed lightly and whispered, "Are you okay? You seem quiet." He thought he was keeping up the act, but the act had already crumbled on my side the moment I discovered the truth. I gave him a small soft nod, because sometimes nodding is the most powerful form of deception. He took it as reassurance. He thought I was still asleep in the narrative he had created. He thought the final piece of his plan was falling into place smoothly. He had no idea that the documents were no longer in his favor. He had no idea that the people he trusted to support his claims now had a different picture of reality. He had no idea that the calls he made secretly were known. He had no idea that every signature he forged, every lie he crafted, every step he planned had already been exposed in quiet, precise detail. His downfall was already sealed. He just did not know it yet. When he finished his coffee, he stood up with a stretch and walked toward the bedroom, humming again. That sound, that careless sound, stabbed the air with arrogance. He put on his jacket, checked himself in the mirror, and smiled like a man stepping onto a winner's stage. I followed him slowly into the room, leaning against the doorframe and watching him pack his bag in a hurry. He turned to me and said casually, "Don't wait up for me today, things might take a while." His tone was so casual, so confident, so unbothered that for a moment I wondered how many lies he had needed to tell himself to maintain such ease. And then it happened. The shift. I spoke his name. Just his name. Softly, calmly, evenly. The way a judge might say the name of the accused before reading the verdict. He stopped in the middle of zipping his bag and turned to me, his expression almost puzzled, almost amused. He thought I was about to ask something naive or offer some worried little question that he could dismiss with ease. But when he saw my face, something flickered across his eyes. Something small but telling. Recognition. Awareness. The first crack in the mask he wore so confidently. I stepped closer to him and placed a folder on the bed. The same folder he believed was hidden. The same folder he thought I would never find. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at me, the confusion spreading across his features like ink in water. I did not speak. I did not need to. Silence carried more weight now than any accusation could. He reached for the folder slowly with a trembling hesitation that betrayed his confidence. The moment he opened it, the air between us changed. His eyes widened, his hands stiffened, his breath hitched. Every piece of his plan stared back at him from the pages he once guarded so fiercely. Everything he forged, everything he concealed, everything he stole, everything he plotted. He looked at me with disbelief, as if he could not understand how his perfect scheme had slipped out of his control. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His throat tightened, his pride began to crumble. His shoulders sagged under the weight of exposure. I watched him in silence, because this was the moment the truth finally crashed down on him. And then softly, with the same calmness he mistook for weakness, I told him I knew. I told him I had known for days. I told him every detail, every document, every secret, every lie he had built his future on was already dismantled. His face twisted from shock to confusion to frustration to fear in one long slow unraveling that felt like justice. He asked how. He asked why. He asked when. He asked who helped me. His voice began to rise slightly, but mine never did. I did not need to shout. Truth does not require volume. Truth has its own power. He stepped back like the air around him had suddenly grown too heavy to breathe. His hands shook. His confidence drained from his expression like water leaking from a broken cup. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape, searching for a version of reality he could still control. But there was none. The world he built had collapsed the moment I placed that folder on the bed. I told him he had underestimated the woman standing before him. I told him he had built his entire scheme on the belief that I would remain silent, unaware and powerless. I told him he had forgotten one essential truth. A woman betrayed does not stay broken. A woman betrayed becomes dangerous. He tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. He whispered something like, "This isn't possible," but it was. And it was unfolding in front of him with the same inevitability he once believed belonged to his victory. As he stood there trembling, confused, defeated, I finally realized something important. Betrayal is not the end. It is the beginning of clarity. And clarity is the birthplace of power. He thought everything would be his in 3 days. But on the 3rd day he discovered the truth. Nothing was his anymore, not even his illusion of control. When the moment finally arrived, it did not strike like thunder or explode like a storm. It came with a slow unfolding of truth, a truth so sharp that it sliced through every lie he had ever wrapped around me. I had spent days gathering proof, strengthening my resolve, building a silent fortress inside myself. And now it was time to reveal what he never expected me to know. Not with rage, not with shaking hands, but with a calm so steady it became its own kind of force. He had believed I would crumble the moment he whispered, "Only 3 days. Finally everything is mine." He had believed I would remain blind and broken. He had believed he had already won. But the truth has a beautiful way of arriving at the perfect time. It happened in the living room where he sat relaxed after another one of his secretive outings. He leaned back with that victorious expression he wore so often lately, the expression of a man who had no idea he was walking straight into his own downfall. His legs stretched out, his eyes half closed, a satisfied sigh escaping him. He looked like someone celebrating a victory he had not yet earned. He did not notice the shift in my energy. He did not see the quiet determination radiating through my posture. He did not sense that the woman standing before him no longer carried the same innocence he had relied on for so long. I sat across from him, carefully placing the documents I had gathered on the table between us. He glanced at them casually, not even suspicious, because he truly believed I was incapable of challenging him. That was his fatal mistake. Arrogance blinds people even more than lies. When he finally looked up at me, he smiled, that smug, slow smile that used to twist my stomach but now only revealed the hollow truth of who he really was. His voice softened as he asked what all that was for. He believed I was seeking reassurance or permission or comfort. He believed he still held the upper hand. He had no idea the foundation beneath him was already cracking. I took a slow breath and began speaking. My voice steady, my eyes locked on his. I told him I knew everything. That I had seen the papers. That I had spoken to the people he never wanted me to reach. That I had discovered every detail he worked so hard to hide. His smile froze. His eyes blinked. His breath caught mid-inhale. It was the first fracture in his carefully crafted mask. But he tried to recover. He tried to laugh it off as confusion or paranoia or misunderstanding. That was his instinct whenever he felt control slipping through his fingers. But I did not back down. I repeated the truth, every word hitting him with the precision of a hammer striking a nail. As I laid out each discovery, he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. First subtle, then obvious. He was no longer lounging in quiet confidence. His shoulders tensed. His hands tightened into fists. His jaw twitched. I could almost see the moment he realized the walls were closing in around him. He tried to interrupt me, but I held my voice strong. He tried to deny everything, but I stayed steady. He tried to turn the blame onto me, but I reminded him of every document, every signature, every secret movement he thought would never see the light. He was unraveling in front of me. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was something far more powerful. His mask was dissolving piece by piece, leaving behind the raw truth he had hidden beneath confidence and charm. And for the first time he saw me not as someone he could manipulate or weaken, but as someone he could no longer control. That realization struck him harder than any accusation ever could. He attempted one last desperate tactic. He stood up, pacing slowly, pretending he was calm. Pretending he was still in control. Pretending he could talk his way out of the truth. He said I was emotional. He said I was imagining things. He said everything would make sense if I just trusted him. But every word he spoke sounded weaker than the last, because the truth was louder than any lie he could ever create. Then I revealed the final piece. The part he never expected me to uncover. The detail that turned his fake triumph into the beginning of his fall. It was the one thing that connected every clue and exposed every intention. When I placed that final document on the table, he froze completely. His body went still, like something inside him had snapped. His eyes widened. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper, as if his brain could not process how I had managed to reach this point. He whispered a single word, asking how. Not in anger, but in genuine disbelief. And I answered with the truth. I told him I had been listening, watching, learning. I told him I had stopped trusting his explanations long before he realized. I told him that silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence is observation. Silence is the strongest place from which truth can rise. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. As if the woman he thought he had outsmarted had transformed into someone he could no longer manipulate. His reaction shifted from confidence to shock, then to fear. Not fear of me. Fear of losing what he spent so long trying to steal. Fear of losing the control he worshipped. Fear of facing the consequences he had always believed he was too clever to encounter. He stumbled over excuses, grasping for any thread that might save him. But every excuse contradicted the last. Every explanation fell apart. Every defense collapsed the moment I pointed out another detail he had overlooked. I did not raise my voice. I did not break down. I did not let anger guide me. My strength was in my steadiness. My power was in my clarity. While he spiraled, I remained calm. And that calmness shook him more deeply than any outburst ever could. It was the calmness of someone who had already won. Finally, when he realized he could not talk his way out, he tried the most predictable tactic. He attempted to turn gentle. Suddenly his voice softened. His eyes watered. His tone shifted to sympathy. He reached out for my hand, the same hand he held when he whispered those chilling words, "Only 3 days." As if pretending to care would erase the truth. As if feigned sweetness could undo betrayal. But I did not move. I let his hand hover in the space between us, reaching for something that was no longer his. He began to plead, not for forgiveness, for control. He begged me not to act yet, not to expose anything, not to ruin everything. But the irony filled the room like a heavy breath. He spoke of ruin after spending months planning mine. He spoke of fairness after trying to take everything I built. He spoke of love after plotting against my future. His words rang empty. His desperation revealed the truth he had always tried to hide. He never cared for me. He cared for what he could gain from me. Then came the question he hoped would make me pause. He asked what I planned to do next. And that was the moment everything shifted. My answer was simple. I told him that what came next would be fair, not cruel. That I did not need revenge. I only needed justice. I told him that he had 3 days, not me. 3 days to face the truth he created. 3 days to understand that everything he thought belonged to him was slipping through his hands. 3 days to realize that betrayal does not crown kings. It reveals cowards. His reaction shattered him. His face collapsed into disbelief. His breath shook. He sat down again because standing suddenly felt impossible. He stared at me as if the world had turned upside down. But it had not. It had simply corrected itself. Because the truth always wins eventually. Because calm strength is louder than deception. Because the person who prepares in silence becomes unstoppable when the truth finally arrives. And at that moment he understood something he never imagined. He had built a trap. And stepped into it himself. The aftermath did not explode into chaos. It unfolded with a slow steady force that felt almost surreal. For the first time the house felt different. Not because anything physical had changed but because the power in the room had shifted. He was no longer the one standing over my life, shaping my fate, manipulating every quiet detail. The veil had been lifted, and in the clear bright truth of what remained he looked smaller than he ever had. Almost fragile, almost transparent. And I felt something new rising inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, something much deeper. Freedom. He sat on the edge of the couch, his shoulders sinking as though the weight of his choices finally settled on him. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not arrogance, not certainty, not calculation. It was the hollow stare of a man who finally understood that consequences had arrived. That his plans had dissolved. That his imagined victory had been nothing more than a fantasy built on fragile lies. And I stood before him not as the woman he thought he could deceive but as the woman he had underestimated for the last time. He whispered a few words, trying to gather some thread of hope, but even he did not believe the things he was saying. His voice had lost its smoothness. His confidence was gone. His sentences trembled like they were trying to rebuild something that had already collapsed beyond repair. He asked if I hated him. The truth surprised even me. I did not. Hatred required energy and I had none left to waste on him. What I felt was clarity. A clean, quiet clarity that allowed me to finally see the path forward. I told him the truth. That I was done giving him chances he never deserved. That I was done believing in promises he never intended to keep. That I was done shrinking myself so he could feel taller. That I was done carrying the blame he had tried to roll onto my shoulders every time he wanted to mask his guilt. His eyes filled with fear. Not fear of punishment but fear of losing control. Because control was the only thing he ever loved. Not me, not us. Control. When he realized I was not bending, he changed tactics again. He tried to soften his voice. He tried to look remorseful. He even tried to reach for my hand again, as if that simple gesture could erase the mountain of truth that stood between us. But his touch no longer held power. It felt like a stranger reaching for something that no longer belonged to him. I stepped back and his hand fell into the empty space between us. That small motion broke something inside him. His face crumpled. His breath stuttered. His shoulders slumped forward like he had finally accepted the truth. I told him what I wanted next. Not revenge. Not destruction. Just separation. Cleanly. Completely. Permanently. I told him he no longer had access to my decisions, my finances, my plans, my future. Everything he had tried to take would be fully protected and everything he had tried to hide would be revealed. And I meant every word with a calm that intimidated him more than any reaction he expected. He had braced for screaming. He had prepared for rage. He thought I would crumble and beg or lash out and break. But I did neither. I stood tall. That steadiness rattled him in a way nothing else could. He tried to argue. He tried to say I was overreacting. He tried to insist that things could go back to the way they were if we just talked it through. But even as he said the words, he knew they were useless. Lies sound different after the truth has been spoken. They lose their shine. They lose their shape. They fall flat like a dull echo trying to bounce off walls that no longer exist. I looked him in the eyes and reminded him of every choice he had made. Every step he had taken toward betrayal. Every moment he believed he would win at my expense. And as I spoke, his expression shifted from fear to resignation. Finally he fell silent. Truly silent. Not the strategic silence he used to manipulate situations. Not the calculating silence he used when planning his next move. This was the silence of defeat. The silence of a man who understood he had no argument left. No excuse left. No advantage left. It was over. And he knew it. I walked away from him and the movement felt like shedding a heavy coat I had worn for too long. Every step felt lighter. Each breath deeper. I went into the bedroom and began gathering the things that belonged to me. Not in anger. Not in panic. With intention. With purpose. Because leaving is not just about walking out the door. Leaving is about reclaiming the pieces of yourself that someone tried to take. It is about finding the strength to move forward even when your heart carries the weight of everything that happened. It is about choosing yourself after someone else chose betrayal. As I packed, he followed me to the doorway but did not cross the threshold. He stood there watching as if witnessing the end of something he never believed would end. His voice cracked when he asked if I was sure. I nodded. I told him that sometimes the strongest choice a person can make is to walk away from what is hurting them, even if walking away means rebuilding everything from the ground up. He swallowed hard and whispered that he never meant for things to go this far. But intentions mean nothing when actions speak louder. And his actions had written the ending long before his words tried to erase it. When I zipped the final bag, I felt a shift inside me. A release. A quiet, unshakable certainty that this was the right choice. I carried my things to the door and he followed slowly, like each step he took behind me was heavier than the last. He reached for the door as if he wanted to close it before I crossed the threshold, but he stopped halfway. His hand trembled. His eyes stared into mine with a desperation that had no power anymore. I stepped past him and he whispered my name one last time. I paused but did not turn around. Some final words do not deserve acknowledgement. Outside, the air felt different. Clearer. Brighter. I stood at the edge of the walkway and inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill the spaces inside me that had once held fear and confusion and doubt. The world did not change, but I had. My steps forward felt steady. My mind felt sharp. My heart felt open to rebuilding, not with him but with myself. As I walked away, I felt the last remnants of his influence fall from my shoulders. The final pieces of deception dissolving behind me. He had whispered only 3 days, finally everything is mine. But the truth stood firmly on the opposite end. Because in those same 3 days everything he tried to steal slipped through his hands, and everything I thought I had lost returned to me with greater strength. Those 3 days did not belong to him. They belonged to me. Walking away was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. A stronger one. A wiser one. A story written by a woman who rose from betrayal not with bitterness but with clarity. A woman who discovered her power in silence and her freedom in truth. A woman who learned that sometimes the strongest revenge is not destruction but rebuilding. Not retaliation but reclaiming your own life. He thought he had won. He thought I would break. He thought I would collapse under the weight of what he had done. But instead I walked away standing taller than ever. Because healing begins the moment you choose yourself. And that is exactly what I did. I walked into the rest of my life. And left his lies behind forever.